Hello everyone, and welcome back to the tutorial for March's featured image of this Nashville skyline. This is going to be part 3, Photomatix. If you want to go back and see part 1, which shows me taking the photo and talks about some settings used, and part 2 shows a little bit of work I did in Lightroom just to prep these files for Photomatix. And now here we are in Photomatix. I've got it set to the default setting, which actually doesn't look too bad. I'm going to make a few adjustments here, but it's a good idea to go ahead and start with this default. It's pretty generic, pretty plain, which is how we want it, which is how I want it when I come out of Photomatix. Most of the bulk of the adjustments that we're going to do are going to be done in the next video in Photoshop. So you can see over here there's a bunch of presets that Photomatix gives you, and we can just click through and look at some of these. You can kind of tell what they do. The different tells you all the different settings that you can use over here. Some of them are using exposure fusion, some of them are using the detail enhancer, like this one, and some of them get pretty crazy, and this is certainly not something you want to do right there. Stay away from, well, really stay away from all of these. This is not what we want. So let's go back and start with the default, and over here is where you're going to be making all your adjustments. The idea is to just go ahead and, if you want to, just go ahead and slide them all the way, and you can kind of just see what they do. Color saturation, that one's pretty obvious, but this will give you a good idea of what the overall effect is to your image, so that you can decide what you want to keep and what you don't. Generally, I keep the strength somewhere, I don't know, down here somewhere, and certainly saturation. Any saturation you want to add, I would go ahead and do that in Photoshop rather than Photomatix. Just kind of keep this down. Luminosity is kind of the overall brightness. You can see that we can darken it some. One thing you want to keep an eye on is your histogram down here. You want to make sure that this mountain, if you will, stays right in the middle. This represents the darks and the brights, and if it moves all the way over, then you're going to start clipping some of the highlights. If you move it all the way this way, it's going to start clipping some of the shadows. So kind of keep an eye on that as we go through it. Now you can see right here there's not very much shadows, and we kind of want to compress it a little bit and bring it back. And we can do that with detail contrast. You can see that this is one that I do tend to use all the way up. That one and luminosity are pretty much the only two that I will keep all the way to the right. Lighting adjustments. This is where you're going to get really crazy. If you turn it this way, you see the sky ends up darker than the ground, which I think looks pretty weird. I would tend to stay away from pushing this into the negatives. If you want to keep it at 0, it's pretty even, and you can see when you move it up here. Now the sky is brighter than the ground, which is how it really is. So it's a little more realistic to keep that slider all the way to the right for the lighting adjustment. So that's where I'm going to leave it on this one. Smoothing the highlights. This will help your noise. If you look at what it does in the sky, if you push it all the way, you see how it really just kind of smooths out the sky in particular. And if you bring it all the way down, you do tend to get, it's a little darker, and it will get more noise if you were to zoom in. So just for that, just to try to keep the noise down, I do usually bring this out here somewhere out there. Alright, the white point, again, that's going to help you with your histogram. You see these areas right here where it's really bright, almost blown out, so this may be a little too far. So let's go ahead and just take this back some. And that's going to see how this moves it over. Watch what it does if I take it all the way. See how it pushed it? You get an overall kind of dull looking image, but it's pushed the highlights all the way back, and now the mountain in your histogram is right there in the middle, which means it's pretty flat. So just to get a little bit of contrast in there, let's go ahead and bring it back. And same with the black point. You see, if we take this all the way, watch what it does here. Pushes it way over. So let's pull this back. somewhere in here. So now you get pretty even. Like, I want it to come out looking pretty flat. I want to do most of my contrast and color work in Photoshop rather than Photomatix. So temperature I don't usually change. I've adjusted the temperature to what I want before, when I was in Lightroom, before coming into Photomatix. So smoothing, I will bring this micro smoothing up some. You can see if you bring it all the way down, a lot of people want to do that. It gives a pretty cool looking effect to it, but it also just, it makes the noise. You can see this section right here. Look at all this noise. That's what a lot of that micro smoothing will do. If you just pull it back some, and if you compare that, it does look a lot better when you zoom in. So, and also brightened up that a little bit. So let's keep that. Gamma is one that really darkens the overall effect as well. So if you bring it all the way this way, you see how bright, which obviously is unusable. So I usually keep this somewhere in here. Alright. Now we're looking pretty good here. It's pretty flat, it's pretty boring, but that's okay. That's how we're gonna keep it when we get to Photoshop. Like I said, that's where we're gonna do the adjustments to really pop this contrast and color that we've got. Saturation in the highlights and the shadows, I leave those, and I usually leave these the same as well. The clippings, but you can see what they do. Shadow smoothness, kind of just gets rid of some of that contrast. Shadow clipping is a bad thing. So I'll just leave those out there. And this is pretty close to what I want. It looks flat, it looks plain, it looks simple. When we get into Photoshop next, we're going to do some curves adjustments and contrast and color, color balance. It's going to get us what we want. So I hope this explained a few things. Check out coming soon video number 4 is the Photoshop version. Thanks for watching.